Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. Not this Saturday, but next Saturday, April 9th, is UFC 273. And on paper, in my opinion, and I don't think this is controversial to say at all, this is the best UFC pay-per-view of 2022. Maybe I was just spoiled by the end of 2021, but these pay-per-views lately, I feel like they've left a lot to be desired. UFC 272, not even having a title fight as the main event. I know Jorge versus Colby was a big fight, but still, I just feel like it could have been better. And then 271 and 270, I just don't feel like we're stacked enough. But you compare them to 273 blows them all out of the water. I'm going to briefly go through the card, and I'm going to talk about all the notable fights. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to grade this card as a whole, as it stands right now. And before I even get into that, do me a favor, make sure to like the video. And before I even give you my opinion, I want you to comment down below and let me know what grade would you give UFC 273 as it stands right now. Unfortunately today, actually, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we lost our first big fight on UFC 273, but I just hope this is the only fight we lose and it's still a very stacked fight card. So first off, you have the main event, Alexander Volkanovski versus the Korean Zombie. And stylistically, this is a fight that I'm very intrigued in. You have the Korean Zombie, who is a great striker. He's a fan-friendly fighter. He's going to want to stand there and trade. He's not really going to want to take Volkanovski down. He's going to be looking for the knockout. Then you have Volkanovski. Many people are already saying he's well on his way to being the GOAT featherweight. And I think that's very possible. He wins 1-2 more fights. The argument can easily be made that he takes GOAT status over Jose Aldo potentially. And, if he wins this fight against the Korean Zombie, another big win for him, a decent name on the resume. But I don't want to come off like I'm complaining here, but I am complaining. It should not be the Korean Zombie in this fight. I love the Korean Zombie. I'm intrigued in this matchup. I'm excited for this matchup. Don't take this the wrong way. It should be Alexander Volkanovski versus Max Holloway 3. For those of you who don't remember, Volkanovski versus Holloway 3 was announced for March for UFC 272. And then the UFC decided to move Volkanovski to UFC 273 and match him up with Chan Sung Jung. And I said if they were going to reschedule it anyway, why not wait and see how long Max is going to be out and maybe just rebook the trilogy fight? Because I just feel like there's unfinished business between Volkanovski and Max Holloway. We need to see the third fight. The second fight was razor close. A lot of people think Max Holloway is still the uncrowned champion. So why not wait, especially if Max isn't going to be out for a long time, and just rebook the fight? Well, unfortunately, UFC said, no, we're booking Volkanovski versus Chan Sung Jung. And then Max comes out and says, I'll be ready by April. So it kind of sucks knowing Max could step in and you have the Korean Zombie. Don't get me wrong, I'm still intrigued in this matchup. I still think it's a fun fight. But I just want to see the finality of Volkanovski versus Holloway. So many people constantly talk about those first two fights between those guys, saying how close it is. And, this is a complaint about the main event, but again, I'm still super excited for this fight, and I think the Korean Zombie can win this fight. And I really like the Korean Zombie, but I almost wish that he does not win this fight because it's just going to throw the division kind of into turmoil a little bit. And then, then Max Holloway is going to fight the Korean Zombie in the next title shot, or Volkanovski, is he going to get an immediate rematch depending on what happens? But just on paper, forget about all those circumstances. I really like this fight. It's two high-level featherweights. Alexander Volkanovski, look at the guys he's beaten. Chad Mendes, closer to his prime. Jose Aldo. Max Holloway twice. Brian Ortega most recently. And the Brian Ortega win, I know a lot of people, say that was the fight of the year of last year. That was a one-sided beatdown by Alexander Volkanovski with two close submission attempts by Brian Ortega. So Volkanovski went out there, put a beating on Brian Ortega. And Brian Ortega, I know MMA math doesn't work, but Brian Ortega has a win over Chan Sung Jung and a dominant win. I know he hurt the Korean Zombie early, and people say, the Korean Zombie could never recover and come back to win. But still, it's kind of hard for me to get super pumped for this fight when you have the Korean Zombie coming in on a one-fight win streak. But overall, again, I'm still excited. Let's move on to the co-main event. In this co-main event, again, this is kind of a similar situation. It's not really the same situation, but it's similar in my mind, at least, of the Volkanovski-Holloway. This is a fight that just needs to happen. Aljamain Sterling defending his bantamweight title against, his undisputed bantamweight title against interim bantamweight champion Petr Yan. So back at UFC 259 in March of last year, it seems like ages ago at this point in time, Petr Yan was on his way to a decision or a potential stoppage victory over Aljamain Sterling. He has some type of mental lapse, throws an illegal knee, gets DQ'd. Aljamain Sterling puts on a bit of an act. Even Ben Askren got up quicker than Aljamain Sterling did, and Ben Askren took a much harder knee. But either way, Petr Yan should not have made this mistake. You're a high-level fighter. You should know the rules of the sport you're fighting in. I know a lot of people like to hate on Aljamain Sterling, myself included. I don't like the way he's acted since then, but I don't think anybody was ever going to accept him as a champion. And then, it's not his fault. He has to pull out of the fight that was scheduled for UFC 267 October last year. We were supposed to finally get an answer. He pulls out. The UFC decides, okay, we're going to let Petr Yan fight Corey Sandhagen for the interim bantamweight title. That's how Petr Yan is now the interim bantamweight champion, but he's really considered the real champion by most people. And we're finally going to get this rematch and finally, get some finality to this division, because most people feel like Aljamain Sterling is a paper champion. And I would agree with him. He's not the real champion. He was losing the fight and he was even getting dominated in the later rounds. But I think a lot of people forget how competitive this fight was early in the fight. Aljamain Sterling was crowding Petr Yan. It was a super exciting fight. And then Petr Yan, as he always does, starts to make adjustments and eventually started to take over that fight. But I am super pumped for this fight. Aljamain Sterling, he's had over a year to make adjustments. He's looked at this tape. I'm sure he could come out and shock us all. Then you have Petr Yan, who I consider one, if not two, pound for pound best fighters in the world. His skill set is just so good. He has elite level striking. He has great grappling. He has great power. He's super technical. There's nothing that Petr Yan does not have. He makes great adjustments mid-fight. And then you have Aljamain Sterling, who has great grappling. He has decent striking. The first fight I was super excited for. And I thought going into that first fight that Aljamain Sterling had to grapple Petr Yan to win the fight. Well, we've seen that Yan is the better grappler. He was manhandling Aljamain Sterling in that first fight. So I'm curious kind of what game plan Aljamain Sterling comes in with to try to defeat Petr Yan after experiencing and probably rewatching that fight from UFC 259 last year. I am pumped for this fight. I'm probably more excited for this bantamweight title fight than I am the featherweight title fight. Okay, moving down the card, I think this is most people's most anticipated fight on the card, which is just crazy. And I'm right up there with those people. I'm super hyped for this fight. You have Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev. When have we ever seen a guy come in, beat up a couple trash cans, then get a decent step up in competition against Gerald Meerschaert, sleep him in the first round, then destroy Li Jingliang, and now he's fighting arguably number one, number two, I'm not sure where he sits in the rankings right now, Gilbert Burns. And if he defeats Gilbert Burns, this is 100% a number one contender fight for Khamzat Chimaev. I've talked about it countless times on this channel. The reason the UFC wanted to book Khamzat Chimaev versus Leon Edwards, they rebooked it 3 times, even though, Leon Edwards pulled out of the first one, Khamzat pulled out the second and third. The reason they continued to rebook it is because they wanted to get Khamzat Chimaev a win against a top-ranked guy and fast-track him to a title. And that's very rare that you ever see that. You see the UFC book guys slowly up the rankings. They said, you know what, we see the star power in Khamzat Chimaev. The skills are there. Let's book him against a top-ranked guy. If he wins that fight, let's give him a title shot. And if he goes out there and starches Gilbert Burns, like a lot of people think he will, then he will undoubtedly be next in line for Kamaru Usman or Leon Edwards. Whoever wins out of that fight, they're probably fighting in June. And for me, this fight is just so compelling because as good as Khamzat Chimaev has looked, he has not fought anyone the skill level of Gilbert Burns. He just has not. Li Jingliang, don't get me wrong, that was a decent natural progression of Khamzat Chimaev up the rankings, but Gilbert Burns is in a whole different universe. And I am so curious how this is going to play out because Khamzat Chimaev likes to take guys down and smash them. Gilbert Burns has phenomenal jiu-jitsu and submissions. And I'm curious, what's going to be the game plan here? Are you going to come out and try to take him down and just risk potentially getting submitted, or are you just going to try to strike with him? I think Khamzat Chimaev is the much bigger guy. I think Gilbert Burns is a little bit chinny. He's a former lightweight. He was KO'd by Dan Hooker a while back. I'm just super interested, but Gilbert Burns has evolved so much. He almost stopped Kamaru Usman. People forget that. And then eventually he lost. But this fight is so compelling. And if Gilbert Burns goes out there, a lot of people constantly say, I'm not fighting this guy. He's ranked too low. He's ranked too low. If he goes out there and ends the hype train that is Khamzat Chimaev, Gilbert Burns, arguably has a claim to the next title shot, especially considering Kamaru Usman's beating a lot of guys for their second and potentially third time. You know, he's already beat Jorge twice. He's coming up. He's going to try to beat Leon for a second time. He's beaten Colby twice. So why not Gilbert next if he's able to derail Khamzat Chimaev? And I think Gilbert's name will kind of blow up a little bit more because Khamzat Chimaev garners so much interest. So that's enough about that fight. I'm super hyped for that fight. I'm just super hyped for this card in general. And I'll be doing prediction videos for all these notable fights. So make sure you subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Moving down the card, and I don't know what the UFC might adjust this bout order. And one more thing about Burns and Khamzat. I wish, I know this fight probably doesn't last 5 rounds or even 3 rounds. I just wish a fight of this magnitude was 5 rounds. They made it for Nate Diaz versus Leon Edwards. They made it for Nick Diaz versus Robbie Lawler. Gilbert Burns versus Khamzat Chimaev is 100% a number 1 contender fight, at least for Khamzat Chimaev, but I also think for Gilbert Burns. So why not make it 5 rounds? Even if it doesn't go 3 rounds, I still think it would be awesome. Imagine we get a really close competitive fight and it goes to decision. I would prefer to just have those extra 2 rounds in the back pocket. But it is what it is. I'm not going to complain too much. I love this fight. Moving down the card, and again, this bout order is not official. Mackenzie Dern versus Tecia Torres. Amazing women's strawweight fight. The women's strawweight division is my favorite division as far as the women out of the women's divisions. You have Mackenzie Dern. I'm curious how she's going to bounce back after her after her most recent loss against Marina Rodriguez, where she was competitive, but she lost. So I'm curious how she bounces back. You have a legit strawweight contender in Tecia Torres, very well-rounded, super interesting fight. Then you have, and this is kind of the hit to the card, talking about this fight. We had Nasruddin Imavov versus Kelvin Gastelum. You had the up-and-coming contender in Nasruddin versus the guy that's been around for a while in Kelvin Gastelum. And unfortunately, Imavov apparently has visa issues, wasn't able to get in, so that fight is potentially being rescheduled. And they replaced it with Alexei Oleinik versus Ilir Latifi. That fight was supposed to be on the most recent UFC Fight Night card. It got canceled for whatever reason. I don't remember why. And now that fight's being shifted to UFC 273 to basically take the spot of that Imavov versus Kelvin Gastelum fight. Super disappointed. I was so excited for that fight. Kelvin Gastelum, people talk bad about him just because he's lost a lot of fights. This guy never takes an easy fight. I mean, to come out and after, being on this losing streak, he could have arguably won the fight against Jared Cannonier. I thought it was a very close fight. To take a savage like Nasruddin Imavov, it's arguably could be his UFC career. If he lost that fight, he could have been cut. Moving down the card a little bit more, Aspen Ladd versus Raquel Pennington. Not super pumped for that fight, but that's a decent prelim. Ian Gary versus Darian Weeks. Ian Gary has a lot of hype around him. Interested to see how he does. Another kind of hit on the card, Dreskis Duplessis was supposed to fight Chris Curtis. Chris Curtis pulled out. Anthony Hernandez stepped in. Still a decent prelim. Then you have Jairzinho Rozenstruik versus Marcin Tybura. The heavyweight fights I'm always looking forward to. We could see a crazy knockout there. You have Mickey Gall versus Mike Mallet. Julio Arce versus Daniel Santos. That should be a great bantamweight fight. The bantamweight division is my favorite division within the UFC. It's just so talent stacked. I mean, people outside the top 15 are just incredible. It's crazy to see this many killers in one division. But as far as my overall grade for this fight, this is an amazing fight card. But there is a couple things, I wish it was Max Holloway in instead of Chan Sung Jung. The Gilbert Burns Khamzat Chimaev fight, I wish was 5 rounds, but that's not much of a complaint. I would give this card, and I'm a hard grader, I would give it a solid A. I mean, those top 3 fights alone, I'd be willing to pay, I think it's like $75 for the pay-per-view where I'm at, including taxes and everything. Just those top 3 fights in Khamzat Chimaev, Gilbert Burns, Aljamain Sterling, Petr Yan, and Alexander Volkanovski versus Chan Sung Jung. I'd be willing to pay for that alone. You have some decent prelims in here. You have the hype job in Ian Gary, who's got a lot of hype behind him. A lot of people are pushing him. I want to see how he does. He only has 1 fight in the UFC. Then you have, some of these great skilled guys that are definitely going to be on the prelims. I'm looking forward to pretty much every fight on this card, so I have to give it a solid A. Let me know what you think in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, and thank you so much for watching.